Welcome to Beyond the Beat, your go-to source for insider knowledge on fantasy football. Hosted by Zach Hyduke and Matt Olson. We bring you straight to the action with exclusive interviews from NFL beat writers, draft experts, and film gurus. Get the news from the field, straight from the sources at training camp and beyond. This is where fantasy wins are made.
Welcome in, everyone, to Beyond the Beat with 32 Beat Writers. My name is Zach Hyduke, and today I'm going to be talking to you about a few of the things that happened here at the NFL trade deadline, and then we're going to be digging in to the Saints with Ross Jackson, beat writer, obviously covering the Saints. We had a really good conversation with him a little bit earlier today. I'm going to play that for you guys, and then if you have any questions at the end, if you're watching on the live stream here, you can, of course, ask those, and we can go ahead and dig into those as well. So glad to have you in here with us. Before we get too far in, though, I did want to mention, if you have not seen this, please go check this out. If you're interested, we are looking to bring in another writer slash podcast host slash face of college football slash NFL draft prospects over here at 32. You can check out that job description and everything that is over there. You can find that on our X profile at 32 Beat Writers. That's at 32 Beat Writers. Also, of course, on our website, but you can find that website link there pinned in our profile on our X account, our Twitter account. So if you are an expert in NFL draft or in prospects and college football and the like, please make sure to check that out. We'd love to hear from you and get that application. So, in fact, I think I may have just gotten one now. So thanks to whoever that was. We'll be checking that out and following up. So, all right, let's go ahead and dig into it if we can. There was not a ridiculous amount of action here at the trade deadline, but we did see at least three potentially fantasy relevant players traded during the NFL trade deadline here. The first of them being running back Khalil Herbert being traded from the Chicago Bears to the Cincinnati Bengals, with Zach Moss being out for the season now, essentially anyways. This move does make a ton of sense. Herbert has barely been used this season at all for the Chicago Bears, which is kind of a little surprising just given the run that he has had there previously. Obviously, with the new coordinator, that somewhat makes sense. And then in addition to that, of course, they brought in Swift. So I understand that things were not exactly the same as has been in the past, but being a healthy scratch the past couple of games is kind of odd. So, somebody's able to make use of him here, probably in Cincinnati. Chase Brown has probably a lock on the lead role for the moment, of course, with them. But we'll see if perhaps Herbert has a chance to kind of push for that role. I'm not confident that he necessarily will, but there's a slight possibility. We've seen Herbert be productive in the past at times, and so I'm really interested to see how that shakes out. Is he worth a pickup on your side of things for tomorrow morning? If you had a spot in a deeper roster, wouldn't be the worst add, but I wouldn't expect to see too much from him this week, of course. We'll see how that continues to play out. Will the Bengals running back Khalil Herbert play on Thursday? That was a question that was posed to Joe Burrow, and we did see him on the practice field, by the way, today. James Rapine had this for us. He's standing next to me, says Joe Burrow. If he doesn't know what to do, I lean over and tell him. He's right next to me, so it's an easy thing for me to do. So, for what it's worth, Joe Burrow feels like he should be comfortable. It looks like we might be able to see a little bit of Herbert on Thursday, but again, short week, wouldn't anticipate a whole heck of a lot. We'll have to see how that plays out. Then we saw Mike Williams sent from the Jets to the Steelers. With the Jets, Mike Williams has been borderline irrelevant. Of course, he was very productive when he was with the Chargers, aside from the times that he was hurt. Coming off of that knee injury here, he still hasn't been incredibly involved, at least from a production standpoint. I do think that what this does for the Steelers is puts them in a really comfortable, or a more comfortable spot, I should say, insofar as their wide receiver room is concerned. It kind of just slots everybody where they should be slotted a little bit better. It bumps Van Jefferson and Calvin Austin kind of into tertiary roles, as more slotty roles. And, they should fulfill those things and take maybe a little bit of pressure even off of George Pickens, which I think is good. George Pickens, I think we've seen be pretty good. Only has one touchdown on the year, I think, maybe like 500 and some odd yards at this point for like 35 catches, I think it was. But can we see that step up? Obviously, he's had his own personal issues, but when we put everybody in roles that, they kind of fit better into, even if Mike Williams himself is not incredibly, productive for the Steelers, I do think what it does is it puts everybody, like I said, into better fitting roles so that they can perform better at the things that they're supposed to be doing themselves. So in a way, I think you may actually be able to see some more consistency and maybe even some more upside from George Pickens in that offense, in the passing game, just in general, giving Russell Wilson another target, another deep, probably outside guy as well, where Russell Wilson likes to throw, as we know, does not love to throw over the middle. And that's continued. So we'll see how that shakes out. I would not be picking Mike Williams up if he's already rostered personally, but I mean, you could take a shot. Again, I don't expect him to be incredibly relevant, but perhaps he helps the others who are already there. All right, let's hit the last one that's relevant, and then we'll get to our conversation with Ross Jackson. Jonathan Mingo was moved from the Panthers to the Cowboys. Honestly, this kind of struck me as a really weird move, and the Cowboys, rightly so, deserve a lot of criticism for a lot of things that have gone on this year. But you just lose your starter and Dak Prescott for, 4 games now at least. I don't know why they're buying players and they're sitting 4 games behind the leader in their division in Washington. They're sitting 3 games behind Philadelphia. My only guess is that it's because they play Philadelphia and Washington twice each still down the stretch of their schedule. And I think maybe they think they can make up games there. But if you drop this next week against Philly at home, you are basically toast. So it's just, I don't know why you're throwing around. I understand it was like a 4th round pick or whatever, but I don't really understand throwing future assets away when you're clearly a team as the Cowboys who need all the help they can get this coming year and probably aren't going anywhere this year anyways. Let's say you do make the playoffs as the 7th team, maybe, like if you look at the NFC standings. What is Jonathan Mingo going to do for you this year? I don't know, especially for a 4th. There's got to be somebody else that you can probably pick up in the draft for, at that value anyways, that maybe has a little bit more. I don't want to just say upside. Like, I'm not just trying to trash Mingo here, but he hasn't done anything for the Panthers. Now, the Panthers are not great, but neither will the Cowboys be with Cooper Rush. Oddly enough, he has a pretty good record when he's the starter in there, but this is not the same Cowboys team that he has played on when that has been the case. So, Dak is gone. If he's gone, nobody else is going to be productive other than CeeDee Lamb insofar as the wide receiver room is concerned. So, short term, disregard this completely and entirety. But in the future, I don't know. It does interest me a tiny, tiny bit. Maybe that's just because I like Jonathan Mingo coming in. I don't know. But once Dak gets back, maybe you see him contribute. And, the thing is, though, what's his ceiling? Like Jalen Tolbert, 350 yards, I think, on the season at this point. I don't think it's super relevant. I don't know why the Cowboys did it. Makes no sense. But who am I to question the almighty Jerry Jones? All right. I'm going to go ahead and play a quick ad from our sponsor, and we will be right back.
Oh, every week I'm answering these start-sit questions on Sunday morning. I go to the weekly rankings on playerprofiler.com just to make sure that my instincts are correct, and sometimes they're not. And guess what? More often than not, I go with the projections. You may not feel great about starting Daniel Jones or Wan'Dale Robinson, but the projections say, hey, that's the move. It may not feel right, but you use those projections to get it right. That's the power of the Player Profiler system. It's Evan Ringler, it's Bradley Stalder, it's Theo Greminger, of course, it's Billy Muzio making these rankings possible. The season rankings, so you know who to pick up, who to trade for. The dynasty rankings are part of this. The offensive line rankings from Dan Fornick, one of the best in the business. Then we get our cornerback rankings, which show which corners are matched up with which wide receivers. And now, in collaboration with the IDP show, we have IDP rankings. Did you know that? Did you? So go to playerprofiler.com, use promo code PODFATHER. Get you 25% off the player rankings package right now at playerprofiler.com. Enjoy!
Hey, everybody. I'm here with beat writer Ross Jackson. Ross covers the New Orleans Saints for LouisianaSports.net and is a Saints analyst for WWLTV CBS New Orleans and also hosts the Locked On Saints podcast. You can find him on X at Ross Jackson Nola. Ross, welcome to the show.
Hey, man, thanks so much for having me. I'm very glad to be here. I have always admired y'all's work and everything. I've always appreciated y'all's work as well. So it means a lot to be here. Thanks so much for the invite.
Yeah, of course. I'm super glad to have you. We appreciate the love you give us every once in a while. And of course, we like what you put out there as well. Listen to you when I can as well on the Locked On Saints podcast, which, as I mentioned earlier, everybody should check out. I was actually listening to that today. Obviously, we're recording this Tuesday afternoon, so we'll see if anything happens while we're recording here during the trade deadline. I know that the Saints may be some sellers of some certain players, which we can get into here. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, the big news, obviously, that everybody would know at this point is that they have fired their head coach, Dennis Allen, and promoted special teams coordinator Darren Rizzi to interim head coach. So, I mean, I was listening to your show that you put out yesterday, and you said that was a needed and like a necessary thing. Why?
Yeah, I think, a lot of people are going to look at 2024, right? Oh, a 7-game losing streak. And the 7th game of that is a loss to the NFL's worst team at 1-7, which is a team that they blew out the opening game of the season and all that. But really, this goes back to 2023. It goes back to 2022. The way that I view it is that the New Orleans Saints created a gold standard for themselves, a standard with which or to which they claim to hold themselves, right? And that standard was built from 2006 to about 2021 with former head coach Sean Payton in the building. The New Orleans Saints moved into the Dennis Allen era with the intention of extending the Sean Payton impact, right? And they have not been able to extend that standard. They've not been able to meet that standard. Not the standard that we hold them to as media, not the standard that fans are holding them to, not the standard that's based on comparing them to other teams. It's their standard, Zach, and they were not matching that standard at all when it comes to what they had done under Dennis Allen. 3 playoff-less seasons. If you go back to 2006, I believe, and you look at all of the teams since then and where the Saints rank amongst win-loss records, they're 5th. That's how much they were winning before Dennis Allen showed up. And so it just didn't come together the way that they wanted it to, didn't come together the way that they needed it to. It was time to make a move.
Yeah. Excuse me. I know that this was kind of their first firing of a head coach midseason ever, I think, basically, you said, other than maybe a resignation or something in like the 80s. But, you almost kind of didn't expect them to do this, but you're glad that they did, it sounds like. So I guess, moving forward, I don't know a whole heck of a lot about the special teams coordinator that they promoted. Maybe you can talk to us a little bit about that. Kind of what do you expect now from this team moving forward for this year then?
Yeah. I'll say real quick, there were both resignations and the last firing to happen midseason was in the 80s as well. So it's been many, many decades since the Saints have actually gotten this done. And so what you're getting with Darren Rizzi, for instance, who comes in as a special teams coordinator, first of all, I think special teams coordinators always make excellent interim head coaches. Whenever you're in that situation, you need somebody that has a relationship with the roster. Special teams coordinators tend to have a relationship with the entire roster because special teams is built of both offensive and defensive players. Rizzi himself, by the way, has also been the assistant head coach over the course of the past couple of seasons. So he's even got relationships with the quarterbacks helping to work in that capacity of the game as well. So you get somebody that's got a good relationship, somebody that's highly respected. NFL fans will note the new kickoff rules. Darren Rizzi was a big driver, one of the two big drivers behind, and really is seen as kind of the figurehead of that rule change into the new kickoffs, which has restored kick returns back to its kind of pre-pandemic kind of level. And so that's what we've seen, in terms of league impact from a guy like Darren Rizzi. But then as a coach philosophy, when he was asked about it during his, we'll call it his introductory press conference as interim head coach, he talked about being an accountability guy. And that's something that you've heard a lot of players in the locker room have told us about. Saints players in the locker room have told us about a lack of accountability, seeing things in practice, but not saying things about getting them corrected. Tyrann Mathieu, New Orleans native, and of course, New Orleans Saints safety, talked about Darren Rizzi as somebody that will really let you know how it is. There's guys that want to be coached, guys that want to be told the truth. And Tyrann Mathieu is one of the guys that wants to be told the truth. And when it comes down to Darren Rizzi, he talked about him being somebody that's going to call folks out. Said sometimes people just need to be called out. Foster Moreau, New Orleans Saints tight end, referred to him as an unbelievable leader of men. And so I think you're going to hear a lot of positive things about him. There's good things about him. He brings the grit, he brings attitude, he brings accountability and all that. It's not going to be something that's going to completely 180 this team or anything like that, but he's the kind of guy that this roster needs right now.
Yeah. I think all of those points that you make is really interesting. And, it was kind of critical. And I know you mentioned this as well yesterday, leaving Kubiak in the role that he is in currently with that offense as the coordinator there, and kind of trying to keep stability as much as possible with such a big change such as that. Man, I don't know. I'm struggling today. I think I was yelling too much at the Bucks for not going for 2 last night.
I could not believe it. I could not believe it.
But Todd Bowles' decisions aside here, I'll try to get through all these questions without just killing everybody on the microphone listening. But, kind of, what do you think? Do you think that they're seriously going to be considering him maybe moving forward as far as the season, is concerned? What are they actually going to try to salvage from this crew that's currently here? We can get into their cap situation, but it's just a really interesting situation. Alvin Kamara is basically your most productive player. Derek Carr has been in and out of the lineup with injuries. Spencer Rattler, there was a lot of hope around him, but he maybe isn't. I don't know that you were necessarily just expecting him to develop into anything super special, but what are they going to try to figure out this season as they move into next? And then we can take a look at what their offseason is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the rest of this season is really all about evaluating your young talent. And you're going to only be able to do that at positions where that's available, right? Young guys like cornerback Alante Taylor, cornerback Kool-Aid McKinstry, who they just drafted in this year's draft. Once he comes back, he missed last week's game with a hamstring injury. You're looking at evaluating those guys. Safety Jordan Howden, who's a second-year player playing next to Tyrann Mathieu, who's the wily veteran, if you will. Getting a look at guys like Carl Granderson and continue to do that. They know who these players are. Don't get me wrong, but this is the opportunity to where you start to evaluate your roster with an understanding of, okay, what's there on this roster to build the future around, because I think it will be, not to jump topics, but I think it will be an active offseason for this team. And so I think that what you're looking at is, who are the players that you can build your future around? And that's one of the reasons why I also like where Darren Rizzi is coming from, because there's a lot around, or there's a good bit around what the New Orleans Saints have been doing that he doesn't like. The Saints punted on 4th and 1 last week in Carolina, of all places. It's not like you're dealing with home field advantage for the opposing team. It's not a big juggernaut over on the other side, anything like that. Go for it. And that was something that Darren Rizzi had mentioned, especially at the 50 or just beyond the 50, that he didn't like that call. He said the analytics tell you to go for it. So it's just, you're going to get more opportunities here with probably a more aggressive decision maker, perhaps, to really get an opportunity to evaluate some of this talent. And if the talent isn't working out on the field, Darren Rizzi is not going to be in a position to where he has to maintain anything other than, okay, the product on the field, right? So I can pull this guy and put this guy out there if I think that's going to be better. And so I think you're going to see a lot more sort of aggression in terms of what that all looks like. And I think that benefits your ability to be able to evaluate that young roster moving forward.
Yeah, and I think we saw some of that kind of aggressiveness almost just in that first press conference that he had. I saw a bunch of different quotes. I didn't retweet all of them, but just some of them, the players should be pissed off. I'm pissed off. The fans should be pissed off. My expectations are that guys are going to circle the wagons. I think I'm a good leader. All sorts of just really pretty forward stuff. So hopefully that's a benefit to the team, even just like you said, evaluating what they have and hopefully trying to be as competitive as possible down the stretch while they understand that they're going to be looking forward to the offseason, which let's move into right now. I was taking a look at kind of everything here, and I'm not a cap expert. Whoever, if you try to dig into like the Saints cap situation, it's a quintessential like, I don't know how to figure out this mess of spaghetti out. So maybe you can help me a bit. But like looking at Derek Carr, for instance, they're going to have to kind of decide, all right, is this the guy that we're going to keep or not? At least from kind of what I'm looking at here. If they cut him, they have a potential out, but it's like a $60 million dead cap after the end of this year. If they were to cut him, I think after 2025, they would have 28 million dead. But I don't know if that's possible. Are they looking to move on from Derek Carr? Are they going to keep him around? We've got the wide receiver room with Chris Olave, who's currently in a concussion protocol. He's had some injuries as well. They're going to have to pay him at some point soon if they want to keep him around. Kamara is on a pretty large money deal for a running back, although he's been fairly productive. What on earth are they going to be doing once, February hits and we move into this free agency period in the draft?
Yeah, there's only a handful of players, for instance, that they can cut and save more than like $3 million. So a lot of what you're going to be seeing is either the team trying to make money through alternative methods. Now, they've done this in the past of kicking the can down the road and restructuring contracts. I wouldn't be surprised if those types of moves end up happening because you're not in a situation to carry large cap hits through the new league year and past June 2nd. Past June 1st to designate people as post June 1 transactions. So you're not going to be able to really go that route on more than a couple different players. So then the next piece becomes, what are some of those alternative methods that you can make some money? Well, the Saints can save, I think it's just shy of 18 million, maybe it's just shy of 16 million dollars when and if, as we expect, Ryan Ramczyk, their former right tackle, retires. They'll be able to do a salary cap reduction, have him retire, kind of do the same thing that they've done with other retirements in the past, Malcolm Jenkins, Patrick Robinson, Drew Brees, and others. So that's one mechanic that they'll have available to them. And that will be more of a rework than a restructure, which is a better situation. It's not a perfect situation, but it's a better situation. The next thing that you're looking at is potential contracts that you can restructure, things like that. That comes down to how old is the player? Are they a part of your future plans? Are you just simply stuck and they just have to be a part of your future plans? Like that just might be the situation for them too with the restructure they've already done. So they're kind of already in a hole that might require them to continue to restructure certain deals. The other thing would be if they got lucky and some players ended up retiring. And that's lucky used in a very loose base, lucky in terms of the financials of it all, not lucky in terms of the leadership of your locker room. The last thing that you're looking at is Derek Carr. You could restructure Derek Carr's contract and save around $30 million because he's got a $30 million base salary, but also a $10 million roster bonus. Bring that all the way down to its base, to the veteran base, restructure all the rest of that money. You end up picking up a big pro rate. You have to add more voyage years. Derek Carr sits on your books for many, many years. That's something that the Saints are probably okay with doing. We've seen them do that. In fact, this year, Jameis Winston and Michael Thomas are still on the books, right? And so that wouldn't be out of the ordinary for them. The tricky part becomes, does Derek Carr want to be a part of a rebuild, right? So the head coach that drafted him is the head coach that recruited him to come here to New Orleans in Dennis Allen. Dennis Allen is now gone. Derek Carr has a no trade clause. Can you go to him and say, hey, before the third day of the new league year, which is when that $30 million becomes guaranteed, would you like to not be a part of a rebuild? Can we send you somewhere else? And give him the option to say yes or no with his no trade clause of either being a part of the rebuild or going somewhere else. If he chooses to stay with the rebuild, then you might say, okay, well, if you really want to be helpful, you can rework a little bit of that salary cap with us, and then you can work on it that way. So there's other mechanisms that they could take advantage of. None of them ideal, but it's going to be a part of their process until they finally get out of this cap situation, which is going to take until 2027, probably at the earliest. 2026, they'll have a little bit more freedom, but 2027 is really the light at the end of the tunnel for them.
Okay. Yeah. So a long road to go down there. If you had to, if you had to guess, what would you say their preference is for, especially like that quarterback situation? Would they prefer to kind of move on and bring somebody else in, or do you think that they would prefer to kind of restructure that if you just had to guess?
Yeah, my guess would be that they want to maintain Derek Carr for another year. Like that would be my guess. And then maybe make a different decision as they go into 2026. $28 million in dead cap, you can deal with that. You can navigate that. You're okay there. I mean, we've seen teams now take on, I mean, look at the Denver Broncos, right? Like there's now no such thing as too much dead cap to move on from a quarterback, right? In terms of precedent. And so I think, though, that this is a team that would like to stick with a veteran quarterback moving forward and then bridge the gap to a younger guy. I don't know if that younger guy is on this roster currently, though, is the thing. I don't know if it's Spencer Rattler. I don't know that it's Jake Haener. I've said from the very beginning that Jake Haener and Spencer Rattler are going to be the two young quarterbacks, are going to be a part of the conversation in terms of the successor to Derek Carr, excuse me. But they won't be the only two that are considered in that equation. That there will eventually be some third quarterback that will be a part of that conversation. I think that that will eventually be the case, but I wouldn't be surprised to see them want to stick with Derek Carr as a bridge to sort of that next era. The question is, does he want to do that?
Gotcha. Okay. If they do get him to stick around, if that's their hope and their goal there, then what on earth do they do? They're going to have a pretty high pick in the draft, most likely. I mean, there is a lot of like 2 and 7, 2 and 6 teams right now.
Right.
So that could change a little bit. But right now they're up in the top 5. And so do you think potentially looking at bringing players to build around him, filling out other areas of the roster? And I suppose some of that probably depends on who they maybe bring in as head coach. And we can touch on that a little bit too, because I know you did on your last show, I think this morning. But, Ben Johnson, I think you mentioned with the Lions, offensive coordinator over there. We see a lot of teams when, one version of a coach hasn't worked out and they bring somebody else in, they're kind of almost like the opposite. So obviously he's going to be a big guy that everybody wants anyways, but I'm curious to see if they end up going with an offensive guy after having a defensive guy and Dennis Allen. So maybe talk to me about what it would maybe look like when they work through those head coach options, and then depending on who they get, what that could look like to build the team out through the draft.
Yeah, look, I think Ben Johnson is obviously going to be kind of the crown jewel, right? He'll be the apple of everyone's eye, the belle of the ball, if you will, when it comes to sort of the coaching searches around the entire NFL. And I think he'll find a better situation than what New Orleans is going to have to offer, which is a sunken salary cap and a no clear long-term solution at quarterback. I don't think you're going to be able to convince the top head coaching prospect out there, or candidate, excuse me, out there to take on that situation, unless you can sell them on the organization's patience. The organization has proven to be very patient. Unless you could sell them on that, sell them on the future direction and high draft picks, things like that, if you do end up with one. So maybe that's the way to go, but I don't know if that's necessarily going to benefit or really change anybody's mind there. I think that this is a team that probably does go to either the offensive coach or the non-play caller head coach. I wouldn't be surprised to see them go that way. I think that this is a team that's tried a few different things. They found the success with Sean Payton as the offensive play caller. Then they went to the like weird co-defensive coordinator thing for a year that kind of sunk their defense a bit. And then they went back to, the one single defensive coordinator and all throughout that, Dennis Allen was still the defensive play caller, of course. But you could see over the years, the defense get weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker. And so I think at some point you kind of look at it and you go, okay, got to figure out exactly what's going to, what will serve best. I look at guys like, he would be an offensive play caller, but I look at younger guys in the league along the lines of Ben Johnson, but that aren't Ben Johnson, like a Liam Cohen, for instance, over in Tampa Bay, or a Bobby Slowick over in Houston. That might mean that it ends up being a one and done situation for Clint Kubiak, which would be unfortunate, right? The Saints offensive coordinator who also calls the plays. If one of those two guys comes in, they're probably going to want to be the offensive play caller. And so I don't know what that necessarily means for Kubiak. Slowick and he worked, have been in the same system. They were in San Francisco, all that other stuff. Maybe that, symbiotic relationship maybe works. But I think that those are the ones that you go with. The Saints have to be patient. This is going to be a multi-year rebuild. And the worst thing that they can do is hire somebody now to get them through the rebuild and then sell that coach's rebuild to another head coach at a later time, right? The Lovie Smith approach, if you will. You can't do that. That doesn't show as a positive organization or however it is that you want to look at it. So I think those are the things that are important when it comes to it. They need a developer because they're eventually going to have to develop a future quarterback, because the easiest way to go back to our previous conversation for a second, easiest way to get out of your salary cap situation is to have a starting quarterback that's on a rookie contract. You got two options on the roster. You could go after a third. You might as well get somebody that can develop that talent.
Yeah. Yeah. In some ways, I guess you kind of are trying to go with the whole, Dave Canales and the Panthers approach of basically like hiring a guy that the understanding is it's going to be a while. You can't fire this guy regardless of kind of the outcome for the first couple of years almost. So, and yeah, with Kubiak, they started so hot on offense. That's just, what is that enigma? Why did we see that explosion? Obviously, Carr's been out of the lineup some, so there's that part of it. But if he were to stay around, is he capable of kind of bringing some of that back? Maybe not 47 plus points a game,
sure,
but why did that kind of disappear? And what's the potential there if he does stick around?
Yeah, I'll mention that, of course, the offense was impacted by the injuries, but I'm going to take a note out of Darren Rizzi's book here and say, don't want to say anything about the injuries, don't want to hear anything about the injuries, have to play better. Like, that was Darren Rizzi's comment around injuries and things like that. And so if you're looking at it that way, then I think the next thing that you're looking at is, where does Clint Kubiak successful? Where does he struggle? And I think the places that we've seen Clint Kubiak struggle, going back to his days over in Minnesota when he was an offensive play caller there, is sequencing. Sequencing was something that was very strong at the beginning of the season. You call this play, that builds to this play, that builds to this play. Then you go back to this thing that builds on what you did back. Those types of things where you're setting up things throughout a drive, throughout a game, all those other pieces. Whether it's because they had the rookie quarterback starting for 3 games, whether it's because the injuries to the interior offensive line or the inability to be able to run the football, that's where this team, regardless of where you want to point the finger, that's where I think this team has been least successful so far this season from my eyes, is that when they can't really get the perfect plan going, they haven't had that pivot, that counter punch, that second punch. And so I think that the sequencing piece of that is, how do you build something where you still have the freedom to be able to adjust, change, as opposed to, okay, well, these things aren't working, and so therefore the next thing doesn't work, and therefore the next thing doesn't work, and therefore the next thing doesn't work. You got to be able to pivot, shuffle, do all those types of things. I think that's a piece of what we saw Clint Kubiak struggle with in Minnesota. That's a bit of what we're seeing so far here over the last few weeks, or let's say I'll call it last 7 weeks, but obviously there's some exception in there. But over the course of the last 7 weeks, we've seen some of those struggles here in New Orleans as well. So I think it's one of the things that happens when you go to somebody that is, for all intents and purposes, an inexperienced play caller. So again, you either have to be patient with him or you have to make the change. And I think that's all going to depend upon who that new head coach ends up being.
Yeah. Okay. I think that sequencing thing can be so critical. We see obviously the kings of that would be like, McVay and Shanahan and that type of structure. So, all right, I'll be interested to see if they continue to keep him around or not, like you said, depending on their hire and how that goes. And then, of course, with the test through the rest of the season here, what do you think the biggest thing is that you believe this team needs to accomplish within the next, 9 to 15 months? We've touched on that a little bit, but if you had to boil it all down, what would you say?
Yeah, I think it's first the evaluation of the roster over the course of the last 8 games of the season. That's where everything starts. Then you have to go into a full and wide-ranging coaching search. This is something where I think teams can run into traps sometimes as they go to the head coach that's familiar, right? Falling back on the interim or going to get somebody that's familiar. There's a couple of familiar faces. John Gruden's been around a lot over the course of the past couple of off seasons. I would consider that a familiar face. Avoid it. Aaron Glenn is going to be a fantastic head coach in the NFL, I believe. I think he deserves the opportunity to be a head coach. He should not take the job in New Orleans. Avoid that. Again, it's another fallback. It's basically trying Dennis Allen all over again with a little bit of a different leadership style, right? Same system, all that kind of stuff. Joe Brady, offensive coordinator with the Buffalo Bills, former assistant to the head coach here in New Orleans. Avoid it. Like, just go outside of the facility, make your search as wide ranging as possible. Interview those guys for certain. And then if one of them blows you away, make it that gives you the hire, not the comfort. The New Orleans Saints need to get uncomfortable. So I think that has to be what this offseason is. It has to be an offseason of discomfort. Interview the folks, hire the folks that make you uncomfortable, make the moves that make you uncomfortable. That's the only way to grow out of this situation. And so that could mean some, some departures that tear at the heartstrings a little bit. That could mean exploring other options that could tear at the heartstrings a little bit, like whatever that might be. Coaching departures as well could be a situation there. But I think you have to get as uncomfortable as possible so that you can find new comfort over the course of the next couple of years. So I think that, and then I think in the draft, jumping ahead to that's within 50. Yeah, that's well within 15 months. Getting into the draft. I think the next thing there is looking at what you have to see from this, what you have to offer from this draft class and what this draft class has to offer you. Is there a quarterback? Like, let's say that the Saints end up with a top 5 selection. Is there a quarterback in this year's class that you're really willing to spend a top 5 draft pick on and try to build around? Are you that confident in this quarterback class? There's a lot of question marks about this class. And so if that's not the case, maybe some other team is. And do you do something that the New Orleans Saints haven't done since 2007 and trade back to gather draft capital, kind of a draft pick version of the rebuild that the Houston Texans did, for instance, right? No Deshaun Watson to trade away if you're the New Orleans Saints, but are you able to get somebody to give you, a king's ransom for a top 5, top 3 selection if you have one? That might be worth considering. And then you have the next few years of draft capital that you build off of that to end up being able to kind of help to rebuild your team. So I think that those are the things that you have to be willing to explore if you're New Orleans. You kind of have to do things differently than you have done them in the past. It's time to change it up. It's time to kind of look at different directions, different perspectives, things like that. And I think that's what the next, within the next 9 to 15 months has to be about. Make everything uncomfortable.
Yeah, we'll see how that quarterback class continues to shake out. For those who don't know, it's been a little bit up and down. Some people that or some players that everybody's excited about, but also, there are some red flags on there. And I think there might be a couple of teams towards the top of the board that may be interested in trading down. So that end of year positioning might end up being kind of critical. So we'll have to see how that all shakes out. All right, Ross, I asked you before the show if you wouldn't mind preparing some sort of soapbox. I love this because I never know what anybody's going to bring to the table, but I'm going to give you like 1 to 2 minutes, however long or short you need to take here, to stand on a soapbox and rant about any topic of your choosing. It can be football related or not, and I never know what anybody's going to bring to the table. So, Ross, what is your soapbox rant?
Yeah, listen, I'm not going to do something that's super unique here. I'm going to complain about gas prices, but I'm going to come in with a different angle. All right. For me, it's not about the price of the gas. Why do we still have the 0.9 cents per gallon on all these gas prices? If I'm driving past a place and I need gas and the gas is $3.09, I'm not going to change my mind and not go there if it's $3.01 per gallon. I'm sick of it. I don't know why we do it. It feels gross. It feels dirty. Just tell me that it's $3.01, and I promise you I'll pay you the $3.01. There's no need for this 0.9 cent bull crap on gas prices. That's my soapbox today. That's what I'm here to complain about.
I like it. That is something that bothers me too, I guess, and it's like putting the 0.99 on the end of like a $4.99, for anything like that.
Just tell me it's $5. It's fine. And here's the thing. I promise you, no, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to have heard me just say that. And they're going to think, I've never talked about that. But everyone's going to agree with that. No one's going to be here to defend the 0.9 cents. Nobody's here to do it. Let's get rid of it.
Yeah. Well,
we should all band together. There's more of us than there are them.
I agree with that. And, not that there's anybody out there who probably is doing this and paying in cash. But like, if I how do I pay in tenths of a cent anyways? I don't know. I'm sure that there's somebody who's going to post a comment about like how stupid I am about that. But that doesn't make sense to me either.
No, they're wrong. You're right. They're wrong. What if I handed you 0.9 of a penny? You wouldn't take that from me. That's not usable currency.
No, and in fact, we're gonna get a little nerdy here for a second. The ridges around coins and stuff like that; those were expressly put there so people couldn't shave little bits off back in the day. So maybe it's the equivalent of shaving bits off there. So I don't like that either. So, all right, well, Ross, thanks again for joining us. I really appreciate you joining me here. Before I let you go, though, where can people find you?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find the Locked On Saints podcast free and available wherever you get podcasts. Just search Locked On Saints, also on YouTube. You can find all the written work over at louisianasports.net, and you can find all of it all in one place on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson Nola, Nola. Catch me at WWLTV Channel 4 if you're in the New Orleans area, or on the WWLTV Plus app as well. Zach, thanks so much for having me, man. This was awesome. And again, really appreciate all the work that y'all do in amplifying other people's work and everything, and treating it with respect. And by putting out great content on your own as well. Like this has just been awesome. Like I have such appreciation for you guys. And so thanks so much for having me on.
Well, thanks. We appreciate you guys too. All of you guys out there on the beat. You guys are the reason we're able to do what we do. And so we appreciate that. And specifically you, Ross, and anytime, of course. So, all right, everybody, make sure to check Ross out. Thanks again. It's great having you. We'll see you next time. All right. Thanks again to Ross for joining us here. I appreciate all of you joining us as well. Man, we're at like 10,000 views on this live already. So thank you guys for being in here with me this evening. I just wanted to say before I let you go, okay, I just want to remind you of that role that I said we were posting for, and we're looking at. This will be the last time that I'm going to mention this. All right. You can find that if you're looking for it pinned in our X profile, or I'll give you the link here in a second. We're looking to bring on another podcast host and writer that is going to help us build around our college football and NFL draft prospect offering. Okay. So if that sounds like something that's in your wheelhouse, something that you're really good with, something that you'd like to expand what you do on, and you'd like to help us out with that and check out the team here, you can do that. Find our X account at 32 Beat Writers. If you're not already watching there, that's 32 Beat Writers. And you can find that at our pinned post. Or you can find that directly, 32beatwriters.com/roles. That's 32beatwriters.com/roles. All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Make sure to check out our website at 32beatwriter.com for player news summaries, player tracking tools, and more. You can keep up there for all the most relevant news and information from the beat writers. Again, I always mention this, but we're going to be rolling out some new stuff for you here soon. So please make sure to keep an eye out for that. Use code podcast if you do sign up on the website for 50% off your first month. For Ross Jackson, I'm Zach Hajduk, and we will see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to Beyond the Beat with Zach Hajduk and Matt Olson. For more expert analysis and exclusive insights from the best in the game, don't forget to subscribe and stay ahead of the competition. Until next time, keep turning that insider knowledge into fantasy football wins.